Welcome to today's discussion, Utopian Cities from Plato to Burning Man. What I want to do in the next 15 minutes is to walk you through some more or less imaginary cities elaborated in the history of Western thought. These utopian cities and imaginary cities are usually referred as utopias. What we mean by utopian cities is either nowhere cities or perfect cities. The two meanings that we attach to the word utopias also have slightly different etymology. In the original meaning that Thomas More gave to the word utopia in his work from the beginning of the 16th century, utopia means a nowhere place. So it is a place that we cannot find anywhere in the world. After the beginning of the 17th century, however, the idea of utopian cities took up a slightly different meaning and became the idea of a perfect cities. And so these two meanings that we attach to the word utopia need to be taken into account when we think about these imaginary cities, these utopian cities. The questions that I want you to think about when we look at these imaginary cities are the following ones. So first of all, I want to focus on the main features of utopian cities. So I want to ask, how do these cities look like? How do these perfect and nowhere cities look like? Second, I want to ask, what are the values that inform and support these utopian cities? What are the values that that somewhat really give shape to these features? Another question that I want to address in the next few minutes is if we talk about good cities, if we talk about perfect cities, then we should think about for whom are these cities good? What is the man, what is the human being that is supposed to inhabit these utopian cities? And the last cluster of questions that I have here on the slides is more of a challenge to us in this global classroom. And I want to ask, how can we use utopian cities, how can we use imaginary cities in order to change or improve actual cities that we have in the world, that we find in the world? So the first city that I want you to think about is the city of God. And looking at this picture by Hieronymus Bosch, you can already see some of the main features that that thinkers in Western thought have attributed to utopian cities. So you see the green landscape, you see the water, you see, in very generally speaking, a very ordered place. So the idea of order, the value of order, seems to be very strongly connected to the idea of a perfect society, to the idea of a perfect city. And in the case of the city of God, this order is given by God. But this is not the only option. And in fact, if we look at other utopian cities that have been thought in the history of Western thought, and in particular around the end of the 15th century and the beginning of the 16th century, we can, until somehow the beginning of the 17th century, we can recognize some features of these cities that are also directly connected to this idea of order. The first city that you find here is Atlantis, and Plato talks about Atlantis in the Critias and in the Republic. And you can see the very ordered structure of the city. You can see the big walls that surround the city and the dry ditch that separates the city, the perfect city, from the rest of the world. And a very similar structure you can find in Thomas More Utopia. And in particular in one of the cities of the island of Utopia, which is Amauroth. these ordered cities, these perfect cities that came out of the minds of these thinkers, are all have all this order that is not due to God intervention anymore, but it's due to human activity. And if we look at the other two cities that we have here, Bensalem, which is the city that Francis Bacon describes in the New Atlantis, and the City of the Sun that Tommaso Campanella described in the homonymous book, The City of the Sun, one of the main engine of order, one of the main characteristic of order is the fact that this order is due to people that are also in charge of the production of knowledge inside these societies. And in fact, both in the City of the Sun and in Bensalem, the idea of a knowledge-based society, a knowledge-based city, is central and very, very important. In the case of Bensalem, the third eye of the city, as Bacon calls it, is really represented by the House of Solomon, which is the place where scientists and wise men in the societies gather and take decisions about the city. And in the case of the City of the Sun, as you will see, you will read in the readings for this discussion session, the walls contain an entire encyclopedia that all the people that live in the city contribute to write. So if these are some examples of perfect cities, you can already see and start comparing them and their features, and so see what are the patterns that stay the same and the things that change across these cities. Now, I want you to make a big jump from these cities from other centuries to an urban laboratory that you can find very close to Phoenix. And the name of this urban laboratory is Arcosanti. And as you can read in the website of Arcosanti, Arcosanti is an urban laboratory focused on innovative design, community, and environmental accountability. So these are the values that somehow support and inform the city of Arcosanti, this laboratory, this urban laboratory. We can discuss whether or not this attempt, this experiment has been successful, but it's interesting, I think, for you to think about what are the main features of these of this society and of these experimental cities. And it's also interesting to compare these features to the features of the imaginary cities that I have talked about so far. But Arcosanti, of course, is just one of the examples that we can find of imaginary cities in contemporary world. Another example is Burning Man. Burning Man is a city that gets built at the end of August of every year and stays for a few days and then disappears. People build it up and then basically deconstruct it, and the city disappears from the desert in Nevada where all these people gather to give rise to a brand new city, to a new society. And also in this case, you can just looking at the pattern of the city, you can compare it and start making distinctions between what we find here in Burning Man and what we described in other imaginary cities, both in terms of their features and in terms of the values that support and inform these cities. Now, when we talk about utopian cities, though, it would be a mistake to only see good and exemplary cities. In fact, utopian cities can also be very problematic, and the distinction between them being utopian or them being dystopian becomes very blurry. And this is why I want you to look at this at a documentary about Welthauptstadt Germania 1935, which is the city that Albert Speer and Adolf Hitler wanted Berlin to become, for Berlin to be the new capital of the world, the new capital of the Third Reich. And also in this case, I would invite you to look at what are the main features of these cities. You can see right from these pictures, the big boulevards, the huge building, the stadium that was supposed to help the rise of the Nazi Empire. But Welthauptstadt Germania is definitely not the only example of a utopian city, a city that has never been realized, that is nowhere, but at the same time that is considered to be perfect by many in the world. Also, if we look at, in the same years, at Stalin's Moscow master plan, that was supposed to fight the old Moscow and make Moscow again the capital of the new world. And if you look at the buildings and at the main features of the main urban structure that that Stalin and his architects wanted Moscow to be, you can also in this case compare this imaginary city, these buildings, with other ideas of utopian cities. And as I said before, at this point, the distinction between dystopian and utopian cities becomes very blurry. And it is interesting to see how our real cities that somehow resemble, at least some of them, dystopian cities, can be improved by looking at the imaginary cities that we have in mind. But it is also very important to think critically about the imaginary city, the utopian cities that we have in our mind. And this critical way of addressing the cities by asking, what are the main features of the city? What are the values that support and inform them? As well as asking, who is the kind of man that is supposed to inhabit the cities? Who is the perfect citizens of the city? And do I want to be that citizen? Do I want other people to be those citizens? Are really important questions when we try to modify and to act on our cities and change them and make them better according to an imaginary ideal that we have in our mind. So the main things that I want you to do for this class are take a look at a few of these imaginary cities, compare them, find the differences between them, but at the same time thinking about where is the difference, where's between them being utopian and them being dystopians. And this is why I want you to do this exercise of looking at the two images of Bosch that you find in these slides, one about hell and one about heaven, and see what are the differences between them. Last, I want you to think about the problem of for whom is a city good, and we will discuss this in class at length. And finally, I want you to really think about the challenge that we are posing here, that we are facing here in the global classroom. How should we critically evaluate imaginary cities? How can we use utopian cities to change real cities? I hope you will enjoy this material, and I will see you during the discussion in class.